social emotional development. There's increasing independence from caregivers, so the child is not as reliant for everything. They think about the future. So again, there's this temporal kind of perception that happens, and it enables you to think, oh, what about next week? What about next month? What about summer vacation? Understanding one's place in the world. So who am I in relation to my family, in relation to my school, my class, not like a caste system, but just understanding that an individual is one part of a larger whole. Also, kids at this age, as we said earlier, are attending to friendships and teamwork, collaboration and cooperation. And our middle childhood individuals really want to be liked and accepted by friends. So the friend group, the peer group, is taking precedence over from the family group. Not entirely, and definitely this is culturally mediated. And it's not like, oh, I'm done with my family, but the world widens. I think that's probably a good way to say it. The world widens, and it starts to be more inclusive of friends and peers, as well as other adults who are outside the family unit. And so the child is navigating how to be liked and accepted and interact with all of those new groups. In terms of education, school, as I said earlier, ramps up. So the child is expected to do a lot of stuff. This is kind of a laundry list, but hopefully it'll kind of key you to think about, oh, what was my middle childhood like, right? And to think back. Most of us can remember that phase of our development. And so it's nice to self-reference. So they become more organized. They develop an identity as a student. There's management of responsibilities, privileges, and course materials. So a lot of figuring. Kids can take tests. They can socialize at school. And they also will be engaging, as I said earlier, with diverse populations. So this is across cultures, but it's also across age groups. It's across people with varying abilities and challenges, etc. And the final thing that happens is that success and failure becomes more significant within the school environment, both academically, so in terms of achievement, and socially. So we really, at this point in time, want to start fostering a flexible and growth mindset, right? So if I fail, that doesn't mean I am a failure, but I can adapt my performance and try again. And if you want to talk about growth mindset, Carol Dweck's work, she's from Stanford, we can definitely do that, or you can look it up on your own. Super important. It's the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And it comes to the fore starting in this age. Leisure and play, very important in middle childhood, and we are talking about play in a variety of different contexts and across some different lectures, so be sure to reference those. In differentiating, leisure is free time that's spent away from school, work, or chores, and it's self-directed and involves self-discovery. It typically, for kids in middle childhood, involves play, but for adults, sometimes we're not playing, but we're engaged in leisure, if you know what I mean. And at this stage, kids are first engaging in leisure activities and hobbies. All right. Interpersonal relationships, as I said, very important. So two terms are noted with this. Social referencing, which is children being able to access and adopt novel behaviors observed in their community. So they're looking at what's going on around them, right? And then they're decoding and interpreting social cues. They're comparing themselves to others and choosing responses. And they're really ratcheting up the sophistication of their social engagement. So if you think about it, if you see me across the playground and we're both 10-year-olds and I make eye contact with you and I smile at you, you're going to feel like, yeah, it's okay to go over to her. Or if I'm holding a ball and I kind of look at you and look down at the ball, that's a very subtle cue that says to the other person, hey, I want to play, right? So refining this decoding and interpreting is super important. It can be really challenging for kids with developmental delays of all kinds, but we definitely see it with kids with autism and kids who have intellectual disabilities, that they're not understanding these subtle and ever more sophisticated social referencing cues. The other piece is social competence. So kids at this age are learning to try on different roles, such as being a leader, right? So being competent and skilled. They're forming close friendships. So again, being competent as a social being or a friend and knowing how to do that. And, towards the early developmental period, kids form friendships based on sharing interests. Oh, you like riding a tricycle? I do too. You're my friend, right? Towards the end, kids are starting to group themselves based on common values, commitment, loyalty, and mutual support. So it becomes more of an emotional as well as shared interest kind of thing, this whole world of friendship. And as they spend more time with peers, they get a peer group and they develop a sense of self-worth and being valued. In 1992, a researcher named Harthrop proposed that the ability to get along with other children is the single best indicator of future success as an adult. So when you think about that, that's pretty intense to say, like, the thing that determines whether or not we're going to be a well-adjusted adult is how well we get along with other kids. If you are a person who's worked in peds or is interested in peds, you can look at those kids and say, absolutely, this kid's just going to be fine, or this kid is concerning to me. And it really can be based on this social interaction. All right. Play. Love play. And play is the single most important way that children learn. So we're going to, as I said, we're spending a lot of time on play as we look at different ages and stages of childhood development. At our middle childhood stage, kids are doing a bunch of things. They're making and breaking rules rather than simply following them. They're influenced in their play by cognitive, physical, and verbal skills. So play gets much more sophisticated. They're learning how to manage conflict. You cheated. You didn't get that point. I didn't like how you did that. You weren't following the rules. Any of those things. So rather than running to the adult, they're starting to learn how to manage their own conflict. And that's super important throughout life, as we all know. They're also becoming socially related and developing relationships, which we just spoke about. And they're becoming more focused on the group rather than necessarily an individual child. So we start to have this emergence of peer groups. Physical play is a huge part of this period. And you have a bunch of examples: running and tumbling, rollerblading, sports, and clubs. All sorts of physical kinds of things, as well as computer and video games, right? Because they involve fine motor dexterity. And dramatic play can still be something that's really popular. Again, it's becoming more sophisticated and organized, but kids' imaginations are really blossoming. And so they, my good friends' children who I've watched throughout their lives, developed an entire world. It was an entire fantasy world with different characters, different voices. They all played different parts, and they had this ongoing, totally in the imagination world that was happening throughout middle childhood that was all dramatic and imaginary. So it gets sophisticated, but it can persist. Because of trends in computer and video games, a lot of kids play single player games, but they're still wanting to belong. And so peer activities, as I said, are emerging. And we're also seeing as we get more an evolution of video and computer games, that things like Minecraft, which are extremely popular with children of this age. Think about it. It takes organization and planning. It takes cognitive development. It takes a lot of visual perceptual skill, right? And we're moving it into a multiplayer online environment. So even if kids are playing on their own or with one person, they're still getting the online social component. One only needs to look at Discord, which is an online platform for gaming, to see how important the social component is, and of course continues to be throughout adulthood. Okay, I'm geeking out because I am a giant fan of gaming. So I want to move on. Benefits of play. These kind of go without saying. There's an increase in autonomy, creativity, discovery. There's a development of metacognition, which basically means thinking about how one is thinking, right? So rather than being self-centered and in one's own brain, you can kind of rise above and say, I wonder why I did that. I wonder if I did it differently, if there would be a different outcome. So things like that. It goes with the frontal and prefrontal cortical development. There's also emotional health to be gained from play, language development, and self-regulatory development, sensory, cognitive, and emotional. All right, we're getting to the end. Bear with me. Cultural and environmental contexts. So kids at this stage of development are starting to adapt to adult social context. So there's a co-regulation of the child's responsibility along with the adult's responsibility. And kids are starting to make decisions based on rules that are set by parents and other guides, teachers, coaches, etc., that are present in their life. And also, there are some concerns that arise, and these are kind of I hesitate to say typical, but typical of middle childhood. So being excluded from a social group, and not accidentally excluded, but purposefully and intentionally excluded, which can be extremely painful. Kids start getting bullied at this age because of that ability to compare, as we said. And poverty, while you would think of it not kind of in the same thing as exclusion and bullying, which are more socially mediated, but poverty definitely is a concern of kids of all ages, but definitely middle childhood, because of the nutritional ramifications, the ramifications in terms of illness and stress, the possibility of being injured, and the entry or early entry into criminal activity, which accompanies the need to obtain resources. Kids who are poor also can be bullied or excluded, so it fits in that way as well. All right, so in summary, middle childhood is characterized by gaining a better sense of self and culture beyond the home. Kids are actively participating in school and their communities. There's a great jump in independence and competence in ADLs and IADLs. There's the development of unique interests and personal expression through play and hobbies. They're exploring social worlds and virtual communities, and they're learning how to maneuver complex interpersonal and social worlds, right? So sophisticated interactions. And as we just talked about, there's a bunch of risks associated with middle childhood: bullying, stress issues, potential injuries. And individuals who are living with developmental differences face increased challenges because they're comparing themselves with peers, but also because the bar is just being raised ever higher. So at this point, I'd like you to think about what questions you have about any or all of this. Jot them down, because we won't, hopefully, you'll be watching this before we see each other. So just jot them down. They don't have to be fully formed, they don't have to be written, but scroll back, just have a quick look through the slide deck, see what you have questions about, bring them to class. I'll be more than happy to discuss them, or you can contact me individually if there's something that you really want to dig into. References. And that concludes our lecture for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in class. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye for now.